Good morning on this rather wet and drizzly day in Solihull. Um, the lecture or the reason for this video is to introduce to you three books which I've managed to reprint via Routledge. And these are the building construction, or Mitchell's building construction for 1906. The first one I want to introduce is this one, which is the Elementry course. And it is what the name says, an elementary look at construction. It's nothing too detailed. It just introduces the concept of construction with some nice pictures, some tools, but mostly about communicating the idea of construction right at the beginning and expanding upon that with some of the materials, some of the tools, and some of the detailing. Nothing too complex, just the introduction to it. Then this book is the meat. This is the 1906 Stage 2 and 3 Honours course. Now this is where Mitchell, and you'll see his picture up in the top right hand, sorry, the other way, there you go, top right hand corner, which is the way that Mitchell explains a lot of the construction that was pertinent to the time of the book's publication, 1906. And the third book, and it is the one that I'm most proud to be able to show you. And this is, there are very few copies of this out there. And this is what's called, then it's upside down. This is what's called 40 plates of building construction. And this holds a lot of the drawings that Mitchell had made by his other lecturers. And I'll show you the so there, you can see that there. Beautiful, beautiful drawings. And the reason that we've managed to get all these printed, the big 40 plate hasn't been printed, but it's been scanned and is available to download as a PDF. The other books are in PDF and also in hard copy or hardback copy. But the reason that we've done this is to show the construction pertinent at the time of 1906. And this is important. Queen Victoria had died in 1901, and her son, the Prince of Wales, became king. Now, he is an important man when you start to look at construction, because at this period in time that the big town halls, the big government buildings were starting to be built. And you can see this all over what was then the British Empire. So a lot of big cities that were controlled by the British at the time had these buildings, and the construction within them is what Mitchell was pushing in his two books. And this goes right back. This book here is a book that was made in 1897. Now I'm pretty sure that this is the fourth edition, and I'm pretty sure that there are four predecessors to this, to take it up to around, I think, 1881, when the first books were written. Now Mitchell did this with either Batsford or another company called Cassell's, and these books are rare. I haven't found one earlier than this, but they are about, I'm sure of it, and one day I'll actually find one. But these books are pertinent to you if you are doing alterations or repairs to a building of this period. The materials used are totally different to what we now see in modern construction, both in the manufacture and in the size and orientation of these products. So if you're doing heritage work, then your research should be to look at the building and see what materials have been used. The manufacturers more than likely have gone out of existence, but you should be able to see the difference in size and appreciate that there's probably 100+ years of that material to mature in the position that it was placed. So there was the idea that you've got a manufacturer making materials in brackets, not very good way, and then these not very good materials becoming matured over 100 years. Then we have us with our modern materials trying to lump onto an existing building of that nature, new construction. The two generally don't like each other. The older building has different sizes and needs to do what it's always done, which is breathe and live. But when you start to put modern construction on it or around it and try and do things with it, then the modern construction will, you know, it'll make the building operate the way that you want it to do for modern living. And that is the kiss of death for any older building. You've got to appreciate the style and the way that the building wants to live. So, 3 books that are used to show you how modern materials are made. I put an article up, and I'm going to read it to you now because it's quite interesting. And I'll put the a link to it up in the show notes underneath this. It was put up into the AT magazine, and I've posted it around various versions of it in other mediums. But the one I want you to go to is go and look at the AT magazine, because that's where we first published it. So to spotlight on the 1906 edition, written mostly by Charles F. Mitchell. We know his younger brother George, who was also an architect, had influence within it. And later on in the years, you'll see that when Charles died, then George took over and continued it right up to, I think, about 1969, when Ray Moxley, the Bristol architect, took over and started to change the course of the book. So a spotlight on the 1906 edition. So ever since the initial issue of Mitchell's construction books in 1881, and I'm not sure of this date, but we're sticking by it because it's quite possible that that was the earliest books, by Charles F. Mitchell, no other book series has a continued presence in the construction industry. For almost 140 years, students like me, when I went through, and practitioners, as I was, have referred to both the first and elementary books and a more advanced copy as a standalone reference to construction detailing and materials. Through a prestigious career as a lecturer at the Polytechnic Institute, Regent Street, which later became Regent Street Polytechnic, and finally University of Westminster, Charles F. Mitchell, and he was born in 1859 and he died quite early in 1916, was the senior lecturer. His older brother was head of school. And the picture you see here is a picture of Charles, and it's one of few. I've only seen 2 publications of pictures of Charles. This one, which was quite early on in his career, and one almost before his death. And this picture was produced, well, it was made available by the archivist at the Polytechnic, the University Polytechnic library. And it's in their portrait gallery of one of the magazines that was issued around 1906. So together with his younger brother George, they embarked on an almost 30-year project of writing books together, updating and modifying and expanding the Advanced and Honours series, which was initially published by by Batsford, and then later Routledge. The series grew from an initial volume, which I'm still quite positive about the 1881 date, as the first stage or elementary course. And I think there is an electronic version in what's called the Reese Library in California. I've looked at it and I'm pretty sure it's not the original version. I think this is one that came out a little later. And expanded very quickly into 2 books so that he could expand upon the elementary series into a more robust construction or honours course, dealing with all sorts of bits and pieces. Later on, they expanded and start to look at components and finishes, structures, heat and ventilation, services, and all sorts. And it is quite interesting to note that the early books that Mitchell produced, I think around 1881, were carpentry. And he was a carpenter by training. He later became an architect, which I'll go into in later. So the book series was originally aimed at students attending Regent Street Polytechnic, but the words quickly spread, with the current editions aimed at construction technology students, architects, as we now know them, architectural technologists, building surveyors and quantity surveyors, who are studying for construction technology as part of a qualification route to a degree level attainment and above. The above list of professionals is by no means limited to the reader base. Construction managers, property developers, planners, civil engineers all benefit from certain parts, if not all, of the current editions, adding it to their bibliography and personal knowledge base. And I operate both of these. Zotero is my bibliography book, and Obsidian is my knowledge base. And without the two of them, I think I'd get lost. I used to have spreadsheets all over the place, but now I've got some very specific programs that allow me to drag and drop information out of them, particularly Zotero. If I'm doing citations, I just drag it in and all the citation is done to Harvard. Absolutely brilliant. So Mitchell, he continued the development and updating of his series till his death in 1916. His younger brother George continued his legacy and continued to expand and correct the series until his death in 1953. From then on, several industrial professionals took over the helm and updating the new series. The one that is, as of note, is Ray Moxley, and that book was a turning point in the way that he steered it away from the original and took out a lot of content and tried to put more into it, which he thought was pertinent. And maybe he was right for the time. I don't think so. We know the difference between the two dates. In other words, when George died and when Ray Moxley took over, that somebody called A.W. Mitchell then took over the helm for a while. But he, I think, was a structural engineer and didn't continue. And Ray Moxley took over and did the further expansion and alteration of the book. Many of the older books are still available as hardback versions found on many booksellers' lists who deal in older books and other specific collector book sites. Their importance to the construction industry as a description of the construction practice at specific points in history, and this is quite important to understand, that construction changed in this period as we developed the ideas, as we manufactured new ways of looking at construction materials and how they were used in the development of the buildings we now see still standing around many cities around the world. I have been collecting these books, and I have got loads of them. You could see up towards my bookshelf. I've got a lot of them, all the way up through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, late 60s, when I started at college in 1969, to 70s, all the way through to the modern set of about, I think it's 8 books in the Mitchell series. And at the moment, I'm rewriting them all, and it's my intention to take it back to the original. I am very keen on the way that Mitchell looked at the construction communication process with drawing, looking at the way that you drew the details so that they could be well understood. Although 3D CAD is wonderful, it sometimes doesn't show the clarity of a detail and the thought process of thinking that detail through that can be seen on older pencil and ink drawings. So I'm very keen to start off somebody's career by understanding that concept. The control and use of many materials used in this period differs in the way that they were made and installed, and the site practice at the time of these products being used. The main purpose of this electronic issue is to make current designers and technologists aware of the differences and perhaps the climate enjoyed initially by the product as it was going through 100 years of life. The weather in 1906 probably not that dissimilar to what it is in 2021-22 should be considered. because if you put a product on the north face of a building, it's going to weather different to something that was put onto the east, west, or south elevations. It's not going to get the sun at all, really. It's not going to see the sunrise and sunset that much. So there are long periods of different climates, algae growth, wetness, that make the product different to that on the other elevations. So, although this reprint is dedicated to 1906, each individual edition offers a similar insight into the knowledge base at that particular time. If you take this volume, the 1891 edition, although you see a lot of detailing which has been carried through into the 1906 edition, you'll see some things in here that were pertinent to that particular period in time. So it's best to look at the time scale of your project where it was originally made, and then start to look at that period of time and see when that construction was made. There is simply no heritage construction website database that says what that product will be like. Yes, there are databases out there which say, oh, this is something akin to what was being used, but there is no comparison to going onto site, surveying the building, and then researching what products were used, and then deciding how those products have weathered, what patina is there, what needs to be saved, what cannot be used because it's deteriorated, and what products you're going to replace it with, and what products you're going to join onto that building, and how the two are going to marry together. It is hugely important, because that old building will not like modern day construction being imposed upon it and the climate that we enjoy now, because older buildings were drafty affairs and they were cold, and they were powered by coal fires, which had a huge impact on the room's ability to breathe because they sucked in air like crazy. So sash windows and other things like that made a difference to the operating temperature and the way that building was used in 1906 as to the way it probably is now. Okay, maybe it's managed to survive, and many of the council buildings you see out there which were built in that period have survived reasonably well. But just bear in mind, when you're trying to alter or update a building, remember the original architect or the designer of that building, and the contractor and the constructors and the detailers who put it together. Research it, see if the drawings still exist in some archive or not, and see whether or not you can bring it back to life. So that's it, really. If you want a link, I'll try and put the link down to the AT article. Otherwise, I'll put it up onto Medium, and you can have a look at it there. There are loads of other books out there that you can go and look at, but I think Mitchell's is the one that has the continuity from his early 1881 books right through to present day. And when I eventually go through and update my version of it, then hopefully you'll look at it and say, yep, it's not a bad reproduction, and this is sort of stuff that I think is right for teaching young students to look at older buildings with a little bit more clarity, and perhaps use some of the detailing that was done then. I mean, if the details lasted 140 years, there's got to be something right with it. Good drips, good shielding, good weatherproofing. Understand where the weather is coming from and deal with it. And look at the materials you're going to use. Is it right? Does it have an Agrimol certificate for modern day construction? And are the building regulations going to allow you to do what you need to do? So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, I'll put the links to the books up onto the notes below this YouTube video, and go and have a look at them. They're not cheap books. They're meant for libraries, I think. But if you do buy it, thank you very much. But go to your library and have a look and see if you can get the books into your library, and so others can use the technology that I think in those books is pertinent to you if you are a construction technologist or dealing with older buildings, heritage buildings from around that 1906 period. So that's it. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And again, thanks to Mitchell for starting something that's lasted so long, and to his brothers and relatives who I don't think are around any longer. Excellent. Thanks very much. Cheers.